Okay, so what we got here is the ultimate election. As I said before being cut off, so we're going to set up this special election where all 321 million Americans will vote, 100% turnout. Bernie Sanders is going to win these 11 largest states by 50% plus 1. Meanwhile, Donald Trump will lose those 11 largest states by 1 vote, so it's 50% minus 1. He will win the remaining 39 states by 100%. So Bernie Sanders is not going to receive a single vote from any of those 39 other states. So what happens from this election? Well, the total vote count from this election, Bernie Sanders would get 91,500,011 votes, and Donald Trump would get 229,499,989 votes. As you can see below, Bernie Sanders would win this election. He would only get 28.5% of the vote, but would get 50% plus 1 of the electoral vote. So this presents another problem with the Electoral College. If you plan just right, then you can win the Electoral College and the presidency with less than 50% or even the plurality of the vote. This is due to the winner-take-all mechanism of the Electoral College. Bernie Sanders has become president even though 70% of the people did not vote for him. And mind you, this is in an ideal world where we have 100% turnout across the country. So, given how vote turnout from elections tend to be around 50%, that means that in reality, if this were to happen, Bernie Sanders would win the election by less than 28.5% of the vote. He would be in charge of 100% of the people and yet be selected by less than 3/10 of the people. Now, there is one other major implication that results from the Electoral College, and that is the creation of swing states. Ohio tends to be a popular swing state, especially around elections. However, in past years, some have included Pennsylvania, Florida, Virginia, New Hampshire, and a couple others. Swing states tend to form from a combination of population and party affiliation. Swing states like Ohio, they tend to be split down the middle in terms of party affiliation. In other words, they could go either way. This incentivizes candidates to go to those states and pour all their resources into them so that they could just edge out a tiny victory, just make sure it swings just their way. And in terms of going to other states, like Texas, Bernie Sanders, he has a very tiny chance of winning Texas because it has tended to vote Republican in elections. Even though it has the second most electoral votes in the Electoral College, if he went down there and spent all of his time and resources there, not only would he waste all that money, he would lose the election in that state, so it'd be a waste of money. But also be a waste of time because in that time he spent down in Texas trying in vain to get those votes, Donald Trump could be like, hey, I could win Ohio if I just work a little. I don't have to work nearly as hard as Bernie Sanders. So that means I could just swoop in and take that state. A thing about swing states like Ohio is that it doesn't have the most electoral votes, but it has a lot. Ohio, as I said, is one of the 11 most populous states, so it has quite a bit to give. And given how swing states can be very competitive, Since they can go either way, it's worth the investment in the end. But unfortunately, states like Massachusetts that tend to vote Democrat, neither Donald Trump or Bernie Sanders are going to go there. Donald Trump is going to avoid it because he figures he has no chance of winning it. And besides, what's the point when I could try to win this state, Ohio, where I could get just as many, actually more in this case, electoral votes if I swing the balance? And Bernie Sanders, he's going to avoid Massachusetts because he knows it tends to vote his party, so he doesn't have to spend as much money or time there because he knows that at the end of the day, they're going to vote for him. So he's going to spend time there too. So what happens as a result is that it systematically favors some states based on a combination of their party affiliation and their population. States like Ohio, Florida, Pennsylvania in some cases, and whatever swing state may happen on an election-to-election basis, they're going to get a disproportionate amount of attention by these candidates. You've seen political cartoons where it shows the Electoral College according to the presidential candidates, and it shows it just bloats Ohio. It just makes it huge, while leaving California to be really, really tiny, despite the state having the most electoral votes and people. So a lot of the country is ignored on the campaign, even though their visits won't really influence the election anyway, or how they're going to work in the state. But still, it leaves a lot of this space ignored in the eyes of presidential candidates. They don't view it as worth their time because they know that they can't really do a lot to influence. So it's kind of bad on both fronts. Now, so as you can tell from this video, the Electoral College, it really has become an archaic system in our country. It was once a system that serves to limit majority rule, but now, as the people have gotten more educated and more politically aware, even though their turnout hasn't necessarily improved, it shows that it's really time to move on. Now, granted, most of the time, that experiment we did doesn't really happen. Most of the time, 53 out of the 57 elections that have happened in U.S. history, the winner of the Electoral College, and therefore the presidency, was in fact the winner of the popular vote. However, there is a 7% fail rate. Four presidential elections have produced results where the winner of the popular vote does not win the Electoral College. In 1824, Andrew Jackson won the popular vote, but because there were more than two candidates in the race, and because he didn't secure a majority in the Electoral College, it fell into the House. And because he wasn't really popular among the elite, Henry Clay and some of the other political aristocrats, they decided to make the corrupt bargain, and they decided to cast their votes for the John Quincy Adams because he was more like them. He was more popular among that group. In 1876, Samuel J. Tilden versus Rutherford B. Hayes. In that election, Sam Tilden, he won the popular vote, but same thing happened. He didn't win the electoral vote. But rather than going to the House, the Compromise of 1876 was made. In that deal, it basically gave the presidency to Rutherford B. Hayes, even though he didn't win the popular vote. So that was another case. In 1888, President Grover Cleveland was running for re-election, and he lost to Benjamin Harrison despite winning the popular vote. Why? Because he lost the electoral vote. And finally, most recently, in 2000, as you know, Al Gore, he squeezed out a tiny victory in the national popular vote. But the reason why you don't see, President Al Gore in the history books is because of Florida. George Bush, he only won Florida by a tiny amount, but yet he won all those states' electoral votes. And that pushed him over the top to be the president. So why did this happen? How is this possible? Well, aside from what I mentioned earlier, winning the most populous states and ignoring the rest, the main reason why this tends to happen is because in small states, the candidate that wins the popular vote, they tend to win in landslides in these tiny states like Wyoming, North Dakota, South Dakota, Iowa, Vermont. They win these, they get 60 or 70% of the vote in those states. It's crazy. But then in states like Texas, California, New York, the candidate that becomes president, mind you, not the one that wins the most popular votes, they win these states by tiny margins. And they take advantage of the winner-take-all mechanism that's in place in 48 of the states, plus the District of Columbia. They squeeze out tiny victories in New York, and they win that massive package, not just a little bit, the whole thing. So because of that kind of creates an imbalance when you spread it out across the whole country, and you end up with 60%, well, not really 60, that's a bit much, but maybe 54% of the popular vote, but then you only win 240 or 250 electoral votes. So because of that, it still is possible for a person to win the popular vote but lose the electoral vote and the presidency because of that. Now, you may be saying, well, that's only happened 4 times in 200 years. So, the Electoral College has a 93% success rate. 4 elections spread across 57 is about 7% of the elections. Minus that from 100, 93%. So, our elections under the Electoral College work 93% of the time. Let me ask you this question. Are you okay with a system in which we elect our president that only works 93% of the time, in which only 93% of the time it responds to the popular vote? 4 years is a pretty long term. I was alive for the 2000 election, but I was only 2 years old when it happened. Could you imagine if that 7% came through, and in 2016, 2020, or some other future election to come, a presidential candidate that wins the popular vote, the one that you and your friends end up supporting, loses the election because of this system, because the opponent carefully strategized, used some of these mechanisms, such as the winner-take-all system, going after the 11 biggest states, even though California and Texas tend to vote in Democrat and Republican respectively. They're pretty well insulated. But let's assume, for example, that it does end up happening. Would you be okay with spending the next 4 years, mind you, if you're in Mr. McCabe's class, that's your entire college career, would you be alright going through all of college, figuring, man, I did not vote for that guy, but yet he's in the Oval Office, or democracy has failed us? There are movements to eliminate the Electoral College. It does, however, require a constitutional amendment because the Electoral College is mandated in the Constitution. However, there have been movements in recent years to kind of push for legislators, for representatives and senators to approve and propose a constitutional amendment that would eradicate the Electoral College and move presidential elections strictly and solely to a national popular vote. I remember earlier this year, Mrs. McCabe showed us that website, www.nationalpopularvote.com. She showed us it, and you can visit it too. That's just one of the movements that have happened throughout history to eliminate the Electoral College. If you're all of a sudden critical of this system, or if you had just learned about it and now you're like, man, that's not fair at all, then I would advise you to visit those websites. I would also advise you to think, if you're on the fence about whether the Electoral College is a fair system, whether it's still relevant in today's society. Just think about what you just saw here today. Obviously, I can't make up your mind for you, but think about it. Do you want a system of electing a president that only works 93% of the time? Is that good enough? Is it not good enough? Like I said, I can't answer that question for you. And it wasn't really my duty to answer that question because I'm making this presentation for this class, to finish off the year. But I don't know, I just thought I'd make this presentation a little, no, actually I don't think I can call it unique, but a little personal. Something that, that encourages you to think. Alright, this has been going on for too long. I bet you weren't expecting this to be 40 minutes long, or spread out across 2 parts on YouTube. I don't really have anything else to say about this. In case you're wondering what this game is, it's called The Political Machine. It's on Steam. You can pick it up for a couple dollars. You can simulate running for president. It's actually pretty hard, actually. It's pretty difficult. But yeah, it's a fun game. You can serve as Bernie Sanders or Donald Trump. Okay, that's a wrap.